Welcome, Trip.
Thank you.
Trip was our keynote this afternoon. If you got a chance to catch it. If you didn't, well, we're going to try to cover some of that ground. Trip and I met over the phone not that long ago. He had some questions about how testers think and whatnot. So we had a lovely discussion about the systems approach to thinking, which is very common in the context-driven community. And you seem to be an expert, but at the management level. Was that a good way to classify that?
Yes, I would say that's an excellent way to describe it. What we're trying to do is say if we don't get management thinking about the design and management of work moving in the right direction, that everything else is kind of for naught. If we don't address the right approaches to making service organizations, which is primarily what we work with, designing systems that will enable the work, then testing really kind of, you wind up with trying to make something blue and it turns out red. And then all of a sudden nothing kind of matches very well.
Right. Yeah. And, I think that it really rung true with everybody in the audience, because not only are you talking about a service organization from an IT level, but software testing is a service also. And so a lot of things that you covered really fit well into what we do on a daily basis, the service org versus conventional thought. And so if you don't mind, for the folks watching the show tonight, what's the difference, in your opinion, between conventional thought as far as management is concerned and kind of your approach?
Well, I have to give you a little bit of history lesson, which is kind of what I did during the course of my speech. So for those that may have listened before, I apologize for my redundancy.
That's okay.
But in essence, we have lived kind of a lie for a number of years from a management perspective, and that is that after World War II, or even prior to World War II, W. Edwards Deming was working with manufacturing to help bombs go off when they're supposed to and not in the factories.
That's always a good thing.
That is a positive view. And it helped in the war effort using what would be referred to as quality types of techniques. And after World War II, with Europe decimated, the world had only one place to go to buy its products, and that was the United States. And because the problem became a productivity problem, that is the way that management addressed everything that it did. And this all started in manufacturing, and then what did service do? We wind up copying it. But in essence, what you wound up with was this management thinking about productivity rather than the quality of things that they were making. Now, obviously, all of this message that Deming was trying to communicate to American management was on deaf ears because of this. And he went over to Japan and did the Census Bureau for Japan right after the war, and at that time was invited to speak in front of some engineers in Japan. And Deming was kind of like, well, I don't know about the whole engineering thing, because it isn't going to really affect change, because he already knew in the States that management is really where the thinking needed to change. And so on July 13th, 1950, the Japanese were able to organize a group of people that represented about 75%, 80% of the monetary capital of Japan. And they all came in and listened to his message about quality, and the rest is kind of history. Developed what was called the Japanese Industrial Miracle. This kind of dispels the whole economy of scale myth that I talked about a little bit in the speech also, which was, if you think about it, Japan, no natural resources really in the country, decimated. How did they wind up with none of the scale that the U.S. had in manufacturing, especially let's look at the car industry, and be able to basically, over a period of time, take a lot of the demand. And now if you look back in history, starting in the 70s, you have a lot of bankruptcies with Ford and what was called the Big Three, which we now reference as now the Detroit Three.
Right.
And the thinking really never changed in the management, and still hasn't. And this is still an issue, especially in the States. But what we do see, the work of John Seddon really opened my eyes to some things that were different. Not necessarily for manufacturing, because there's not much manufacturing in the States anymore, but from a service perspective, that we really do have different problems, and why would we copy something that didn't work in the first place back after World War II, and we lost of all of the scale that was supposed to be, if we, like I said, if economies of scale were true, then we would probably still have all the amount of manufacturing. So this is a management problem, and it's a management thinking problem. And John Seddon addressed a lot of this, at least in my mind, from a service organization, especially coming out of manufacturing, that our problem is much different in service than it is in manufacturing. And the biggest difference is this variety of demand issue.
Right.
So, and I'm not saying there isn't variety in manufacturing, but if you ever sat in a contact center, I mean, you talk about variety, and if your organization is doing things like standardization in order to make things efficient and effective in a productivity type of a mindset, then what happens is it creates what we call failure demand, which is a failure to do something or do something right for a customer. And that failure demand is what leaves open room for improvement. And it gives a different perspective on it, because most managers wouldn't think about a measure like that. And it's one of many things that we do with regards to the method that we use in order to change thinking. But it's all of a sudden refocuses what management is sitting there saying, well, we're all about productivity. And so when they sit there and say, well, we're getting 500,000 phone calls through a contact center every week, and you all of a sudden discover that 75% of that demand is failure, then wait a minute, I could turn that off. How much money would that be? Wow. And it'd be, and it's interesting. It kind of whoa, ooh, and it's kind of that shiny object that gets management's attention. And there's several techniques that we use in order to get management thinking in a different way.
Right. So you said we came. This type of thinking came out of the 1950s or whatever, after the war, and we've had this problem for a while. I take it. Assuming we fix this, do you think this will help our current economical problems? Do you think it has anything to do with that, or?
Boy, broad thinker. Yes. The unemployment problem is a management thinking problem. We build what I like to reference, and we talked about a little bit today, artificial scarcity, meaning that there wasn't scarcity to begin with, but we made some, and we do that by ranking employees and things of that sort. But from an efficiency standpoint, what government doesn't want to be efficient? And it's obviously a big election issue, because everybody's trying to address it by cutting budgets and costs.
Right.
That's the way to go about it.
Right.
But they don't know what to cut.
Right.
So they wind up cutting, a lot of the good things with the bad. And what we've done is, we all make fun of kind of the bureaucrats in government type of thing. But to be honest with you, they're the ones closest to the work to kind of understand what is happening out there, to be able to give us some information about how do we fix this thing, because we can't legislate change.
No.
And we've tried. Lord knows we've tried.
Right.
And by virtue of all this legislation, what it's created is just more barriers to things that don't add any value. So if we can create systems out there in government and in the private sector, can it address some of the problems that we have? Yeah, because people will be coming to us to sit there and say, how'd you do that?
Right.
I want to. That makes sense. Yeah. Instead of doing all this junk that you're doing, you're actually creating value. You're actually doing things that make sense. Right now, we're just kind of artificially upholding the economy by creating things that don't need to be there. So it puts you down a whole path. So it is a management thing. Unemployment is a management thinking issue. Definitely. And Deming believed that also.
So one of the things that you covered during your talk, which I really locked in on, was the no plan, instead go to study. And as someone who's actually a new manager, a new test manager, that was interesting to me, because you do get into this model where you're planning first, plan, and then execute, right? And that's the expectation. So when you say no plan, go straight to study, how does that work? Give us an example of what that would be.
Well, it would work the same for any engagement that we would be involved with, because what you have is someone who has an assumption about something. It could be an ideology type of an issue, which we talked about today in government, or it could be somebody who is a manager, a specialist that's never even taken a phone call or done the work. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden they have an idea. You know, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I have my MBA. I never actually did the work in this organization, but I know how to make good companies run well. So they start, and so the idea is spawned. And then what happens is then we pull in, the strategic plan. Mm-hmm. And then we gather up the project managers that we need to execute it, and off we go. Mm-hmm. So what we basically say is, whoa, time out. What do we really understand about the design and management of work before we even address these types of issues? So we would sit there and say, that's not a very good place to start, is at plan. Now, I know the Shewhart cycle and even the Deming cycle, it's plan, do, study, act, plan, do, check, act. So everybody assumes that we should start at plan. Mm-hmm. But Deming would talk about being able to understand your organization as a system by his famous figure 1 in the book Out of the Crisis. And by virtue of that was one of the things that showed up in every manufacturer in Japan over those particular years, was this famous figure 1. So what I put up on the wall there was the model that we use for service organization, which is that you have to understand what the purpose is of the endeavor that you're going after from a customer's point of view. So we view everything from outside in, from a customer's point of view as a system. Mm-hmm. And by virtue of that, we start to understand that the purpose may not necessarily be all of these productivity types of things that got managers' attention, and the cost and the budget types of things. The second thing that we study in most organizations, not all archetypes are demand-based, but most of them are in the service industry, is we study demand. So we understand the type and frequency of demand, we understand what matters to customers, and then we also, the thing we talked about earlier, which is the value failure of the demands. And all of those elements then start to paint a picture and also start to give us clarification about what our purpose really is, because customers have a tendency to communicate what they want through the front line of the people out there. And those are the people we ignore. And this is what I talk about, putting managers and executives in the work to be able to kind of unlearn what they believe to be true and learn a new and better way. So then after that, we look at the capability of the response in association with these new metrics. Failure demand would certainly be one of them, but some of it's end-to-end measures. And if you think about how organizations are designed today, what you in essence have is everything broken out into these functional components and functional specialisms. And as customers, when we call up these organizations, what we find is, well, if you want that piece, you'll give you that piece of the answer. But if you want that, then I've got to transfer you to somebody else, or put you back in the IVR. Into the queue of the IVR. So then we go from there, we look at the flow, the work plus the waste of that end-to-end system, and then we look at what are the system conditions that are driving this design, whether it's IT, the measures that are out there, the processes that are being done. It's everything. Mm-hmm. The systems we're talking about is not just IT, it's all in. Mm-hmm. It's everything that makes it up. And then eventually the management thinking that drives the system conditions. Right. And sometimes they're very unconscious. I mean, people just do them nowadays because that's what we've always done.
Right. Yeah.
This is the way you manage business. Absolutely. Right. So somebody's got to unpack that. And you unpack that through evidence, empirically, with managers to be able to look at their systems and say, well, wait a minute, you make the connection, you help them make the connection between this is what I was thinking and this is what is actually happening. Wow, I didn't expect that. Right. And then all of a sudden you have this change of thinking that happens from an executive level. They sit there and say, well, that was kind of dumb. Well, they don't have to say that, and they won't, by the way. Right. They won't say that, but what they will say is, well, yeah, let's do it different, and that kind of sets the stage. And all of what we do is, as I also explained, is a lot of frontline stuff. We'll pull in some support people and those types of things. It's mostly the frontline people that are dealing with customers on a daily basis that are helping us redesign not only the thinking, but the systems in which they work in. And they help us, in essence, build better systems. And then we pull IT. So we would be taking a new design from what we learned, understanding it as a system first, understanding what the leverage points are for change, and then we will take action. And then by getting a design that actually works for customers, reduces costs exponentially. And by virtue of that, because costs begin to go down, executives get a little excited about that.
Yeah, they like to see those numbers go up.
And the other thing is you're designing work where people aren't checking their brains at the door every door. When you have these functional specialisms in organizations, you only know a piece. And now all of a sudden we're designing work that gives them a broader view of things. And they're, wow, I didn't know that. And it's a discovery process. And then all of a sudden people are actively engaged in not only coming up with ideas, but also in the design of the work, and they get excited, and now all of a sudden they're saying, "Hey, you got to come over and see that. You wouldn't believe what we found.
Right.
You wouldn't believe it took us 6 months to take care of this customer." So it's viral.
Wow.
From a frontline perspective, and culture changes not because that was what our goal was, but by virtue of the fact that people are very excited about doing work that's meaningful.
No.
Yeah,
Go
it's
on.
true. No.
People like doing work that's meaningful, and they like to be
Imagine
involved, and they like
You
to make their
know,
jobs better. That doesn't happen. Go on. So the other thing, I think we covered this a little bit, was the management misfocus, which is time, cost, budget. If you were to offer up 3 other items for management to focus in on, what might those be?
Oh, wow. The toughest, well, I think there's the one big one is just getting themselves out of, the ivy towers and getting into the work and looking at things, the impact of things that they're doing. And there are some that are very good at that. It's not a far cry for them, but the higher up in an organization you go, the tougher it gets because their demands on time are so much different. And the gentleman asked me the question today about, what's the effect of Wall Street? Well, it's huge.
Yeah.
we got to go out there and so that drives a lot of the dysfunction. But if you start to see what the impact is of some of the dysfunction that's being driven because we believe it's the right thing to do, and you see that it isn't, then you begin to think differently. And so I think that that is probably the biggest barrier we have to overcome, because the front lines are the front line already knows the answers. They just don't know how to articulate it in such a way that will get managers' attention. And it really does require someone from the outside to kind of give them a fresh view. And that's one of the things. So, a lot of the guys here that do the testing pieces are independents. And, they get a fresh perspective. And I think that if they could take that just a step further with some of these folks and challenge some of the things that are happening in an organization, I think that would, I think that's something that is very cool.
Yeah. So far, so good. Yeah. Anything else?
No, I mean, I think you answered most of my questions.
Cool.
It was a great session. I learned a lot from it, and it causes me to take pause when I get back to the office and make sure that I'm incorporating a systems approach not only in my testing, but also in my management. And hopefully I can get the same net gain that you're suggesting.
Well, it's funny. I think I would be remiss in not saying that it's not just the systems component to be able to look at your organization as a system, but it's also this whole concept that I think that has been missed, which is around the psychology piece, which is the intervention piece of how do we change thinking? How do we go about and get people to think differently about the design and management of work? And if we begin to address that component also, then I think that we've got something very powerful. And it's certainly something that people can learn. It's not a far run. And you guys see a lot of the junk that comes your way in testing. It all flows downhill. And the guy who gets to testing, yeah. Whoa. How long do they need to test? It's a month. Let's get that thing out there. Type of thing. We got schedules to meet.
Never hear that.
No, you
never ever.
Okay.
These are things I've never heard before.
I want to work for that company.
Right.
Right. Very good.
All right. Well, I think that's it. I think we're squared away.
Okay, cool.
Appreciate you joining us.
I enjoyed it.
And
Thank you,
we'll look
gentlemen.
forward to talking to you more in the hallway.
Okay.